Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special session of The Big Shrink with me, Ash King, and the founder and head psychologist of the Indigo Project, the beautiful and as always interesting and enlightening Mary Hoang.
You really solved me there, Ash.
I was like, how can I weave pasta and chips into this intro? But I'll work on it for next time. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This is going to be a really nice and juicy session because we need your help. We're going to be doing a live Q&A. So we want to be hearing about all of the questions and issues and niggles that you've got on your mind that you want us to explore and you'd like for a little bit of Mary's insight and wisdom. So if you have a look down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little card with a question mark, and that's the little questions tab. So if you click on that, you can type us a question and we can check them out and then we can explore them from there. So we'd love to have your feedback and your input for this session. Hopefully you've been enjoying the session so far. But to kick off, Mary, how's your week been?
Week's been a little crazy. I think like a lot of people at the moment, I'm doing a lot of thinking about what it means, moving forward in my life, how to live more sustainably. I think what's been coming up for me a lot over the last couple of weeks is a lot of questions about what I need to move forward in my life in a way where I feel more connected to myself and I'm actually listening to my needs. So, the pause has been really illuminating in terms of probably how I've been working unsustainably and where that all comes from. So a lot of really kind of deep inner work looking at, I guess, some of my feelings around I'm working on why I'm feeling I need to be more, to be in this world and how I can dial that back. And actually, as always, I think we're always working on just learning how to validate ourselves for just being ourselves and not having to do or be more for others. So I think that's quite a long journey. I don't think there's necessarily a destination that comes with those thoughts. But I'm definitely digging quite deep at the moment and thinking about what it means to really learn how to listen to myself and how that kind of comes out in how I interact with others, how I work, what different sides of the business, are things that I'll be looking forward to and what I actually need to let go of. So those are pretty big questions, but those are things I'm asking at the moment. How about you?
Yeah, my week's been quite good. I had an interesting therapy session this week, which involved me having to recognize that the things that I probably have to talk about are the things that whenever they get brought up, I go, no, look, this is not an issue whatsoever and we shouldn't waste time dealing on that at all. It has nothing to do with this. Like, when I instinctively just decide to shut it down.
No.
And then afterwards I was like, that's the place, isn't it? That you have to go. I'm like,
Totally.
oh,
All
okay.
the places we avoid.
It's like using your fingers to get hair out of the drain. Like when you do everything else to try and like not have to look at it and hope there's no problem, or it'll just fix itself. Like the hair will just dissolve one day, or someone might come and clean your house. Who knows?
Totally.
But
it needs to be done. It needs to be done.
and you have to get in there with the fingers anyway. But I also played a really interesting board game the other day with my sister, and we just became obsessed with it. It's called The Game of Life. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was designed back in the 1800s, so it's been around for ages because we love living in a simulation of life, sort of more so than real life, because it's a lot more controllable. And there's a rule booklet.
There's a distraction from life.
And me, I love control. I'm like, yes, I love reading an instruction manual. So in this game, you kind of live your life pretty much, and you sort of develop a career, and you have families, and you buy stuff, and you have experiences, and you get like life points, and you get money. And I decided to concentrate on money because I thought if I got the most money, I would win the game. Turns out I had an empty life, void of any life points. I had no relationships or genuine experience. And I was very cross about that. So I did not win the game.
You can start the game again.
Have to start it afresh. Have to get some more life points this time.
Okay.
So it was fun. It was like a good little sort of metaphor, I guess, for real life as well, when you kind of, especially always focusing on one area of your life, because you think, oh man, there's going to be so many rewards there. Like when I finally get that degree and I get that job, or I start that business, I get that promotion, and then you get it, and you're like damn it.
This is the big question on everyone's minds at the moment. You know, how am I going to live my life moving forward, and what's around the corner? But, you know, I think everything is pointing to what's happening right now for everyone, and what's coming up in the moment, and how can we be with that instead.
For sure. All right, so let's get stuck into our Q&A segment. And so far, we've got a bunch of questions. Thank you so much for sending these through. Got a really interesting and very pertinent question that we're going to start off with, I think. This is a question: how do you deal with the anxiety around going back to work and back into normal life?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge thing, like I said, has been coming up for me at the moment as well. Is I think a lot of people are definitely feeling a lot of concern about going back to how things were before. There's a lot of uncertainty that's coming up for everyone. And dealing with the anxiety, I think, is this, you know, it's very different for everyone. Like, I think we can think of anxiety is a very global feeling and an emotion, but what it can mean to everyone differently, I think points down to what is it for you that's coming up that's making you anxious? Is it, you know, personally for me, it's like, well, how am I going to have to be in the world? Am I going to have to work just as hard as I had before? Am I going to be, you know, having all these expectations on myself? I just noticed someone.
I'm trying to hide Joel in the background. I'm like, we're having this serious conversation about anxiety. You're going in the fridge.
So, you know, working with any type of anxiety, you know, whether it's about the future or whether it's just, you know, anything really, it's pointing to questions around what you think you actually need right now. And also, you know, how that kind of relates to how things might change in the future. So if people can bring it back to right now, what needs potentially aren't being met at the moment, or what they're recognizing was missing before in their lives. So was it a sense of, you know, connection? Was it space in their lives? Were they able to breathe during their days? Were they kind of on a treadmill that all of a sudden that kind of stopped, and they're wondering whether they want to get back onto it? So I would be really looking at, you know, a little bit closer at the feelings of anxiety that are coming up, and questioning them. It's like, where is this actually coming from? And that will be different for everyone. So is it, you know, expectations on ourselves? Is it expectations that you're getting from people around you or from work? You know, and does that suit you anymore? Does that kind of lifestyle, is that something? I think there's going to be elements that people are really looking forward to going back to. And there's going to be elements of life that people are just, I think that's what's making people anxious, is the thought of like having to speed everything up again, when potentially we're still going through a process of dealing with the losses that we've had. And maybe some of those things maybe needed to go and will not be coming back again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point that you raised about seeing what it is that we need and maybe what that anxiety is bringing up, it actually brings me to another question that we had submitted, which I'll pop up on the screen, which is a little bit more about getting to know ourselves and the signals that we're getting from our mind and from our body. How do we know whether it's just an anxiety feeling, or what your mind knows and what you actually need? So if this fear is like giving us a signal to take our lives in certain ways, or whether we're kind of just unrealistically worrying because that's kind of our go-to mechanism.
I think regardless of whether it's anxiety or anger or whatever the feeling that is coming up, personally, in the way that I work therapeutically, is that, you know, all emotions require our attention and honoring. So, you know, how we separate the two things of whether is this a fear that I'm projecting onto my current environment, or is it something that's going deeper? I think we can ask ourselves the question, have I felt this feeling before? Does this feeling come up for me often? And when it does, it kind of points to something that is a little bit deeper than, you know, our current situations. So for example, like I'm feeling a lot of anxiety at the moment too, and I'm projecting it at the moment onto like my deadlines for my book. I'm thinking, I don't know enough, I'm not being enough, you know, maybe I just need to stop writing this book, maybe I just need to take a bit more space. And there's a little bit of truth in everything, but I know that when I inquire a little bit more deeply, have I felt this feeling before? This feeling is actually very familiar to me, and it's actually pointing to sometimes what we can kind of classify as maybe something that is unhealed within us. You know, it's a signal towards perhaps something that has been unresolved. So to give an example, what's unresolved in me is this feeling that I need to be more for others. And that's what's bringing up the anxiety. So whether it was the book or it's COVID or it's something that's happening in my current situation, I think we rationalize that it's something about the here and now. But usually what the here and now is doing is actually triggering something that is actually a little bit deeper. It's often a little bit more in the unconscious mind, pointing towards stuff that we've kind of not really wanted to look at. So even if I were to change my current circumstances, okay, I'm not going to write the book, or the book was completely finished, I would guess that the feeling for me, if I hadn't resolved some of the deeper, you know, circumstances where I had been feeling like I needed to be more in my childhood and my adolescence, where I've had, you know, situations that have kind of manifested some of that self-belief that I'm not good enough, I'm not being enough. Something else in my environment will be triggering that. So I think another layer that we can look at this is the layer of the thoughts. And what we can do is to separate the thoughts from our feelings as well. So thoughts, what's really interesting about thoughts is, you know, they're not true. They're not always true or real. And so we can go down a little bit of a path of inquiring about these thoughts. Do I have any evidence for these thoughts? Are they helpful? Are they useful for me? And then we can, with the feelings, we must honor them. And when we sit with them for longer periods of time, we can often understand how this pertains to our own situations, our own past, maybe our own past hurts or wounds, and what is coming up with that. And I think in relation, coming back to that question, how do we know the difference between anxiety and sometimes a deeper feeling of intuition? It is really hard, because, you know, if we all knew that was just a fearful thought, and that's, you know, definitely my intuition, I think the world would be a completely different place. But it's so individual for everyone on their journeys, how connected they are to the sense of, okay, usually anxiety is like yelling at me, it's quite critical, it's a little bit more annoying than the voice. I think intuition, our wise self, if we were to think of different parts of ourselves, like we've got the anxious self or the critical parts, we've got this inner child who's kind of got the wounds and the needs, and, you know, and then we've got this part of us which is also more of our wise self. And so what we're trying to get in contact with, which is the question that's been asked, is how do we, you know that it's a more intuitive part of us? We know that part when we are more familiar with it. And that comes with coming into closer contact with our emotions and being able to have a chat with them and to ask them what their needs are. And then it kind of goes into that kind of deeper journey of looking at things into our past. Yeah, so it's challenging, I think, to know for sure. And sometimes if I get a certain feeling quite often, like if I'm anxious for a couple of days over something, it often points to something that I need to look at a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. I can 100% relate. And I still remember when I sort of, before I sort of started going on my sort of inner journey, I suppose, and looking at things like my anxiety as something treatable and not just a part of me.
Mm.
And I used to have quite a nasty relationship with myself, and I used to be like, why are you like this? And oh, you know, always be pathetic, or you won't be able to do this a good job with this. And then recognizing that, you know, that wise voice was never around, because why would I listen to it? Number one, I didn't have any faith in myself. And number two, I didn't ever have that nice and compassionate, nurturing relationship that you need with, you know, yourself, like you need with anyone, for someone to then go, okay, well, here's the wisdom. Here's some inner wisdom that I want to share. So
Yeah.
that's kind of pretty interesting as well, that you kind of need to be like, need to go gently.
Yeah, I definitely think that we can't just turn on, like turning on creativity. We can't just, get up and expect to be creative and smash out something creative. And I think it's the same thing in developing a relationship with all our different parts, with that anxious part of us, with our critic, with our wise self. And I think we start to understand, like getting to know someone, we start to understand the different personalities that the different parts of us actually have. And when we come into that closer relationship, I think we start to know when there's that wise self that comes through, and we have a deeper sense of knowing. And that only comes, I think, with that time of getting to know yourself a little bit deeper. And it comes with trust as well. So if there are feelings that are coming up for people that are repeated, I would always say, like, our feelings are a signal. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily to do with anything in your current environment, but it's always a signal to something. And what does that mean for you? What is making you uncomfortable? And what do you think is needed at the moment? Whether it's, firstly, just assurance, it's honoring, it's compassion. You are allowed to feel like that. And that can kind of break away some of the protection that kind of, oh, what am I supposed to do? And it kind of just sinks us a little bit down into a level of perspective where we can be a bit more of an observer of our feelings and of our thoughts. And that's when we're coming into that more wise self. So we're able to get a little bit of space from the should I do this, the angel and the devil on the shoulder, get a little bit of space from it, and start to understand their personalities. And I think that's when we can get into a little bit more deeper connection with those different parts of ourselves, which allow us to then understand what that voice of intuition sounds like a little bit more.
Absolutely. So we had another really great question that kind of follows on from this. And it has to do with how we might be able to communicate this anxiety to loved ones or the people around us who may not feel the same. So obviously, you know, there might be a lot of people who are just like bloody stoked to be heading back into, you know, like the real world or normal life or whatever you want to call it. And meanwhile, you are really harboring these feelings of anxiety or feeling overwhelmed or unsettled. And you're not quite sure how to go about talking about it. So how might you bring something like this up?
Totally. As we've kind of talked about before, the first step that comes with a lot of the therapeutic work that I'm doing comes with developing that relationship with yourself. So being able to have that conversation with yourself first. How am I really feeling? Whether it comes because you need to write it down and journal about it, and really come into closer contact with yourself and your own thoughts and your own feelings. I think that comes first, because when we start to listen to our own needs, and then we can say, okay, then I have a need to share this with others and to talk about it. And I think that's really important on everyone's healing journey, that then we can then share that with others. How we do that, sometimes we also need to ask people, like, is it okay? This is what I need. And using I statements and saying I feel or I need, and this is what's happening for me. I think when we take responsibility for our thoughts and our feelings, we can really create a situation where, you know, I think what's hard for people is that they don't know how other people are going to handle it. But when we can handle it within ourselves in a way first, because we've had that kind of conversation with ourselves and we've said, it's okay for you to feel like this. It's okay that you feel anxious. You know, I have needs right now for connection. I have needs to share this at the moment. And then we come out into the world and we share that. We're obviously opening ourselves up to vulnerability, but it's those little steps where we just say, you know, like to you, Ash, hey, I need to chat. You know, is that okay? And I just like to talk to you about my feelings without, you don't need to fix anything for me. You don't need to make anything better. It's like, this is what I actually need. I don't want advice. I just want to get my feelings out, and we can sit in silence, or, you know, being a little bit more specific about what you potentially might want from that interaction, and being clear from that. Because I think sometimes on the other side, people are like, do I give advice? Do you want comfort? What do you actually need from me? And I think that can help that tough conversation, go a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think even, you know, like just not assuming that other people are having the exact same feeling experiences that you are, or B, having completely different ones. I think that often we get too stuck on one side, and often I'm the sort of person who feels like, oh my god, I'm so alone, like no one feels this way, I'm like suffering so bad in silence, and I don't want to bring it up because it's going to burden everyone, and I'm going to be a boring or pain in the butt. And other people just think, oh, what I'm feeling is kind of like, I bet like everyone else feels that way, and so they don't really think about maybe asking to check in on a friend. So maybe just like, I guess, normalizing being able to express our truths and our sort of like feeling realities without supposing that people won't get it, or that people know exactly what we're talking about.
Well, absolutely, because, you know, when I talk about a lot of this work being work that we're doing on ourselves, we are really trying to get comfortable with the belief that we deserved to be held by others and to be seen by others. And so much of that work is kind of being done even before you open your mouth to even talk to anyone. So working with some of those thoughts and just recognizing them for what they are, and even talking about it. I remember saying to a friend of mine when I was, you know, learning how to open up, and I just said, I feel really silly, you know, talking to you about myself, because I feel like I don't really have anything interesting to say, and I feel like you're going to judge me. And, you know, getting over this idea that we need to be perfect in how we meet these conversations, and that necessarily the person that we're talking to also needs to be like the best space holder for us as well. Like, I think these conversations are really imperfect, and that's what makes them beautiful as well, is that we don't come in rehearsed. We come in a space where everyone is just, you know, kind of imperfect too. And that's where the connection happens, is just being really honest about, I feel really nervous about this. I don't know how you're going to take it, but this is how I feel.
We can just be a bit cute. Like we can let ourselves be a bit cute sometimes. Like just like a cute little learner. I'm like, I'm learning here. I'm learning how to express. And someone else can be like, well, I'm learning how to listen. I'm learning how to hear you. And I think that learning happens sort of like, it's a lifelong thing, right? And yeah, in all relationships are different too.
Totally. I agree.
All right, let's see what else juicy questions we've got coming up. Okay, here's another great one. And this is a little bit touching on some of the stuff that we've explored in some of our other sessions, but the whole idea of holding on to hope or staying optimistic when the future is so unsure and we don't know sort of where we're going, I guess, like collectively, but also individually, if you just feel really kind of lost and not knowing where you're going at the moment.
Staying optimistic, you know, it's hard when things are challenging. You know, again, the first thing that I would be looking at is, are we honoring the feelings that are really here and present right now? Or are we wanting to, you know, we've talked about this before in some of our chats around this idea of this cultural or societal view that being happy and being positive is what is preferable to being real about our feelings. And so I believe that we have an opportunity to break some of those beliefs that we have, firstly, around the need to be necessarily optimistic and positive all the time. And I think when we break that and we realize that what is important is that we are doing this kind of deeper work and this inner work is a pathway to being more authentic. So if I was being really authentic at the moment, you know, I would say for the last 6 weeks, I've been actually not feeling very optimistic and pretty pessimistic because of what's been happening and what it's bringing up in me. And that's the first step, is just the true honoring of that. Because if we skip that stage and we move to a stage where we are trying to smooth everything over with optimism, I feel like we risk pushing some of these feelings and suppressing them down. And what we know with research around the suppression of emotions is that we may not express, you know, anger if we're suppressing it, but we still experience it within our bodies. We're still feeling it. And if we do this chronically, if we suppress our feelings chronically, what actually happens is that not only are we still feeling the uncomfortable emotions that we don't want to feel, but we actually block more of the positive or, you know, optimistic feelings that we're trying to kind of go for. So it's kind of a bit of a two-stage process. Is being real about how you're feeling often can allow an internal shift, because you are actually really being honest and honoring the feelings that are already there, which allow space for other feelings to actually be there as well. So again, when we look at some of the research, this idea that we should be feeling a whole different range of emotions is called emodiversity. And emodiversity is this idea that, you know, we should be feeling a lot of things, and that is what predicts good mental health. And, you know, because a lot of people think, well, if I just want to be happy, I'll just feel lots of happy emotions and I'll be happy. But that actually doesn't work. The pursuit of happiness, especially in a Western society, actually leads to more unhappiness. So we've got to, you know, it's a little bit of a paradox that feeling the negative or the uncomfortable emotions is actually a gateway to feeling some of the more optimistic ones. And I think once we honor that, we can look to things like, well, what are the things, what am I looking forward to in the future that is based around my own values and my own priorities that may be different to how they were before. And that's a little bit of a difficult process, because we may have been living and working and being and relating in ways that really have not been congruent with an authentic life for us.
I think I've got a little question to follow on from that. So that feeling of, you know, like not needing to overwhelm ourselves with the need to be optimistic or hopeful. If you are harboring a lot of anxiety or, say, fear, is it possible to be holding space for that and space for optimism and hope at the same time?
Absolutely. And, you know, this kind of comes down to that idea again, like we can grow while feeling pain. And so a lot of people think that there are kind of like there is a scale, and you're either on one side of it or you're on the other side of it. But I think our emotions is a lot more complex than that. Like, they're actually quite brief responses that affect how we think as well as how we feel in the body. And that can change from day to day to day. You know, it can change within each moment, that we can be flipping back and forth between optimism and pessimism and kind of holding them at the same time, because, you know, life is kind of complex. Why can't we hold, you know, the sense of like, oh, things aren't really great right now, but at the same time there is a part of me that holds some hope. I think that's actually a really beautiful thing, that in our darkest times it is some faith or some hope in something else that can help pull us through some of the challenging moments that we're having. So absolutely, we can hold both feelings at the same time.
I think that's so interesting, especially because, you know, you've been discussing authenticity and us sort of learning about our true selves. I think that what comes with learning, and the type of learning that we do in the Western world, is that if something is good, it can't be bad. And if something's black, it can't be white. And so we learn in opposites, in binaries. And so, you know, if we're thinking, oh, to be authentic, I have to be, you know, what exactly one thing, I can't be fearful and hopeful. Like that's just not being genuine. You kind of almost think that you need to hook yourself onto one to be
Totally.
being real.
I think that if we pull back a little bit and we think about, you know, for example, a journey that I might take with a client, you know, to distill a little bit about that journey in the context of this question is this idea that, you know, the type of therapy that I'm doing is a lot of parts work. So we're looking at all the different parts of us, the parts that's hopeful, optimistic, loving, caring, anxious, upset, angry, wounded, critical. And it's not about, you know, I think a lot of people think coming into therapy or doing this inner work is about the elimination of certain parts of us that we don't like, that we're changing them and that we're getting rid of them. But, you know, when we pull back in terms of an education of this kind of inner work is more around the integration of all these parts of us so that we can be with parts of us that we actually disown, that we are ashamed of, that we push away. And these come, you know, these are parts of us that are feelings. These are parts of us that are thoughts that we're like, I can't have that thought. That doesn't fit within my identity. And, you know, when we, you know, this is pulling out and looking at, well, what is my identity? Is my identity, or what I've been striving for, is just the outward manifestation or outwardly appearance of all the parts of me that I like and that I want people to see. And that's what actually causes us a lot of problems, is because it takes a lot of energy to try to repress these parts of us that we're not very happy with, or that we're disowning and that we're afraid of or we're embarrassed of. But when we come into closer contact with them, what that allows us to do, when we allow ourselves to honor these parts, listen to these parts, understand where they've come from, they actually can transform, because they are actually gateways for us into deeper levels of self-compassion, self-love, healing, in terms of looking at, well, where did those parts even actually come from in the first place? So this kind of, the idea of therapy is going, we're going to look at the family of you, all the different parts of you, and we're going to know that they're going to be fighting with each other, and, you know, you're not going to want some of them to speak and to show themselves. But if we think about people that we really love and that we admire, people in the public eye, people, you know, friends that we love, you know, characters in our family who are just being kind of like themselves a lot, you know, they don't have a lot of filters, but they've got the scars, they've been, you know, they've been through tough times in their lives, and they're not afraid to talk about them. All of a sudden, you know, these people to us are actually like, they're so amazing. You're just like, wow, you've been through so much. You're kind of in contact with those parts of you that I would be like, oh gosh, like I can't believe you're showing that part of you. But it's just when it's just so interesting when we look at ourselves and we look at all those parts and we think, ew, nobody would want to see them. Like, that's gross. Like, that's not part of my identity. But then we look at these other people who, you know, Brené Brown, like all these beautiful, you know, people, you know, that are in the public eye at the moment, who are just so real about either their inner work, their therapeutic journey, their difficulty with vulnerability. You know, when people start to tell their stories about the challenging things that they've experienced, they all of a sudden become very human and very real. And this is what emo diversity does, is that, and the acceptance of all of ourselves and being authentic, is that it, you know, it leads to a very rich, complex, emotional life that gets then projected outwards. And I think that is, you know, this is what we want, is we want people being more real and integrated and whole, so that it gives us permission to be more real and authentic and weird and fabulous at the same time. And this is the messiness that we kind of want people to be able to express, so that we can just recognize that we're in this kind of ship together, and it's okay.
Absolutely. You know what, you're talking about this and it makes me think of like the best movies. You know, when you're watching the best sort of movies, they make you cry, and sad shit happens, and then they make you like double over laughing, like they make you do everything, and we don't watch it and go, oh, they should have cut out that, you know, sad bit because that was annoying, and or I didn't want to, you know, like we love it for it being there because we love being able to see all parts. But I guess when we're looking at our own sort of movie, we want to do an edit that makes it not quite as interesting or complete and fully rounded.
Absolutely. We want to understand the biases that we have when we look at ourselves. You know, we want to understand why we have that bias. And sometimes, you know, we have that bias because there have been times in our lives when our vulnerability has not been honored in other people. You know, where we haven't been allowed to show certain feelings, where we haven't been allowed to be our whole selves in front of others. And we, you know, these might be situations that we don't think about every day, but that still from some part of us really filter into how we are in the world and how much of ourselves that we actually show. So it is kind of deep, but I think when we look at, if we remember the people that we really love and why we love them, I think it's really because they are being themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that was some real juicy goodness to take away for today. I think our time's up now. Thank you so much to everyone who came on live today and submitted questions. I'm sorry that we didn't get to them all. There were so many good ones. So I might take some screenshots and we can look at maybe answering some in the weeks to come. So much appreciated. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all the love hearts and thumbs up and love eyes. We love that. And thank you so much, Mary, for all your beautiful insight and wisdom, and also your vulnerability, because I think that, you know, not only just me, but probably everyone else who follows you and the journey of Indigo really appreciates all of your beautiful vulnerability and honesty that you put out, you know, into the world and onto social media, just keeping it real.
Someone's going to be messy. Someone's going to lead the way with the messiness.
And look, we're proud for you to do it. We're just like waiting to see, like, how's it going for her? Is it all right? Oh, it's all right. Okay, we can join.
Oh,
you need to be the brave one.
I've got a lot of inner uglies to put out there.
Look, we're all messy. We've all got it happening. And I like these little half-hour sessions where we can just talk about how real that is for not just you and me, but every single other person in planet Earth.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, guys. And you can join us here next week, 4 p.m. Insta Live, Sydney time. Thanks, guys, and see you soon.
Bye.